Hello again, friends. So in the last talk, or in the last clip, we talked about Ryle and Ryle's idea of the category mistake. So now we're going to move on to Strawson. Right? So Strawson agrees with Ryle that our ideas about minds depend on our ideas about bodies. He gets at it in a little bit of a different way. So for Strawson, he's interested in how we identify and individuate minds. So the notion of identity and of individuation are another couple of really useful notions in thinking about philosophy. So when we talk about conditions for identity and individuation, what we're interested in is we're interested in what makes a thing the kind of thing that it is. And we're also interested in what makes a thing different from other kinds of things. Right? So the way that so Strawson has a really nice way of putting it in that essay on self, mind, and body. He says, to know what a so-and-so is, we have to ask the question, what a so-and-so is. Right? So, for example, to know, let's come back to my trusty cup here. To know what a cup is, we have to know certain things about it, right? And I think the most obvious characteristics are sort of functional characteristics, right? What it does. So what is a cup? Well, a cup has, it's solid. It has a non-permeable barrier. It has sort of a convex. I always get those confused. It's got a big hole in the middle that you can put liquids in. It's of a shape that can be grasped by the average human hand, by the average adult human hand. And so this rules out things like bowls, right? Bowls aren't cups because bowls can't be grasped like this. Plates aren't cups, and saucers aren't cups because they can't be grasped like this because they don't have the deep well that allows liquids to be held, allows a lot of liquid to be held. But we also want to know what distinguishes one cup from another cup, right? So, curses, I don't have another cup right here. So imagine I have, one cup, and imagine I have another cup, right? Suspend your disbelief. Imagine there's a cup here. Right? Screw it, I'm getting another cup. That's right. That's how hardcore my commitment to philosophy is. I'll run and get another cup. I've got two cups here, right? So we can identify them both as cups because they have the same features, right? Because they both have non-permeable membranes, they both have deep wells that can hold liquids, etc., etc. But what makes this cup different from this cup? Well, things like color, right? So obviously this one's kind of a whitish pinkish, this one's blue. Importantly, they occupy different regions of space, right? This one is, as I'm sitting here, this one is to the right of this one. Imagine that we could put all of space on like a 3-coordinate grid, right? So that by means of any 3 coordinates, we could give a location of any object in space at an instant in time. Well, these two things would have different coordinates, right? This one occupies this little chunk of space. This one occupies this little chunk of space. So, how do we individuate cups? Well, we individuate them by where they take up room, right? By their location in space. So, a key part in thinking about what exists, or a key ingredient for thinking clearly about what there is to think about what makes a thing the kind of thing that it is, and what makes something different from other things, from other instances of it. So again, Strawson says, to know what a so-and-so is, you have to know what a so-and-so is. So, we come back to minds now. Right? So Descartes gives us a great understanding of what it is to be a mind, right? He says minds are conscious, right? Minds can think, right? Minds are intelligent. But what he doesn't give us, excuse me, what he doesn't give us is a criterion of individuation. That is to say, how do we distinguish one mind from another? For Strawson, he says, well, if you're not thinking like Descartes does, then it's really easy. If you're in a room full of people, suppose you've got 50 people in a room, how do you count up the minds in the room? Well, you just count up the number of people in the room. That's all there is to it. And so Strawson says, well, yeah, right? So Strawson says that's exactly it, right? So we individuate minds. We distinguish one mind from another by appeal to living human beings, by appeal to bodies. So that is to say, we individuate minds by counting bodies, by using living, breathing human bodies, right? So imagine you and your friends, you all decide to become morticians. Imagine you and your 50 closest friends are all hanging out in the morgue. You're drinking your night away in a morgue, because that's not at all weird. And suppose somebody wanted to count up the minds in the room. Well, they wouldn't count up you and your friends, just you and your friends. Rather, strike that. Sorry. If you in your morgue party wanted to count up all of the minds in the room, it's not like you'd count up all the living people and then all the dead people and then add those numbers together, right? Rather, you just add up all of the living people, right? And you'd say, if you've got 50 people there and you've got 100 bodies, 100 dead bodies, you'd say there are 50 minds in this room, right? Even though there are 150 bodies. So, we individuate minds. We distinguish one mind from another by appealing to the living activities of human beings. So, what does this tell us? Well, it tells us that our concept of mind, right, our ideas about mind, depend on ideas about people, right, depend on ideas about bodies. So, we can't have a concept of mind without also having a concept of body. Right, more specifically, of living human bodies, right? It's not just cadavers, right? It's not just physical bodies. It's physical bodies acting in certain ways. So sidebar here. This is why I like to pair Ryle and Strawson together, because they're really close when it comes to when it comes to their final position, but they get at it from two different angles, right? So anyway, back on track. So, Strawson engages, after this, he engages in a little bit of a thought experiment. He says, well, suppose we didn't do that, right? So, if you remember your critical thinking from last semester, whenever the hell you took it, you might remember an argument style called the reductio ad absurdum, right? So, reductio arguments are, you assume some claim for the sake of the argument, you show how that claim entails something utterly absurd, and so that gives you reason to reject your initial claim. Right? So again, you assume something for the sake of the argument, you show how that entails something utterly absurd, and then that licenses you to reject your initial claim. So Strawson uses the thought experiment here to engage in a reductio argument, right? He says, suppose, for the sake of the argument, that we don't individuate minds by appeal to bodies. Right? So again, that's our assumption. We don't individuate minds by appeal to bodies. He says, well, if that's the case, then it's entirely plausible, right? It's entirely possible that you get, or anybody you interact with, gets a new mind once every hour. Because after all, if you're not individuating minds by appeal to bodies, what are your criteria, right? How do you know that the Lassiter who's talking to you right now has the same mind as the Lassiter that started this video about 10 minutes ago? So consistent with our claim that we don't individuate minds by appeal to bodies is that everybody gets a new mind every hour. Or, shit, every half hour. Or, crap, every 15 minutes. Or every 5 minutes. Or every minute. Or every 30 seconds. Or every second. Or every tenth of a second or hundredth of a second. It's entirely possible that you are cycling through literally billions of souls every day. And I would be none the wiser. But surely that's ridiculous, right? Surely it's ridiculous to think that you cycle through a billion minds a day, right? The person, the people who email me today are going to be the same as the people who, well, suppose, Joe Sixpack emails me today. Well, if Joe Sixpack emailed me a week ago, well, I'm the same person, right? It's still Joe Sixpack, right? Still has the same mind, right? It's not a brand new person or a person, however many cycles of minds later, right? It's just ridiculous to think that your mom or your dad or your kids or your significant other or your grandparents, your aunts or uncles, your besties, right? That all of these people cycle through a billion souls a day, right? It's just absurd to think that. So, we can reject our original claim, right? So again, our original claim was that we don't individuate minds by appeal to bodies. And so that gives us reason to think that we do, in fact, individuate minds by appeal to bodily activities. So where does this leave us? Well, for Strawson, he says that any time we think about mind, much like Ryle, we're thinking about human beings doing intelligent or acting in specific ways. Those ways are ways that we describe using words like intelligent or purposeful or intentionally. So, what we're left with Ryle, with both Ryle and with Strawson, is we're left rejecting Descartes' account of the distinction between minds and bodies. For Descartes, minds are over here, bodies are over here. Somehow they interact, right? Because, if I want a cheese sandwich, then my body, then my mind instructs my body to make a cheese sandwich, right? And if I stub my toe, then the painful sensation goes to my mind, right? My mind's all, ow, that hurts, right? My body's like, shut up, right? Okay, no, maybe not the last part. But for Descartes, mind and bodies are very different kinds of things. For Ryle and Strawson, minds and bodies aren't different kinds of things. To talk about a person's mind is just to talk about a person in a very specific sort of way, right? We can talk about people in all sorts of ways, right? I can talk about you as a student of philosophy of human nature. If you have a job, we can talk about you as being an employee at your place of work. We can talk about you as the child of your parents. If you have kids, we can talk about you as the parents of your kids. We can talk about you as friends of a certain person or a certain set of people. We can talk about you in all of these different ways. And to talk about you as having a mind is just another way of talking about you. Right? Mind isn't something separate from you. Mind is you, but you as a living, breathing human being acting in very specific sorts of ways. So, in our next lecture, we're going to see that there are different ways of thinking about the relationship between mind and body. So we have Descartes' sharp division, and we have Ryle and Strawson's trying to reunite them, but not in a way of like sticking them back together, but rather, mind in a sense is a way of thinking about interpreting certain kinds of behaviors, right? It's behaving in certain specific kinds of ways, right? But this is just one option among many, and we'll get to see some more in lectures to come.